Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. What do you do when a HOA, you've never paid, never joined, tapes a violation notice to your gate and fines you for owning a tractor on your own farm? I thought it was a joke. Until the letters started coming certified. Then they made one threat that forced me to take action. Wanna guess which one? Let me back up a bit. My family has owned this land for 3 generations. We're talking about 45 acres of working farmland that my grandfather bought back in 1967. Back then, this whole area was nothing but fields and the occasional farmhouse. My dad worked this land his whole life, and when he passed, it came to me. I've been farming it for the last 12 years, and I plan to keep doing it until they bury me in the same plot of dirt. It's not fancy, it's a real working farm. I grow soybeans and corn mostly, rotate my crops, keep the soil healthy. I've got chickens, a couple of goats, and one extremely opinionated barn cat who thinks he runs the place. And yes, I have a tractor. A 2004 John Deere 5420, to be exact. She's got some rust on her, sure. The paint is faded in spots. There's a dent in the hood from where I backed into my own fence post 5 years ago. But she runs like a dream, and she's gotten me through every planting and harvest season since I bought her used. Now, about 10 years ago, things started changing around here. A development company came sniffing around, making offers on land. They wanted to buy me out, offered me what they probably thought was good money. I told them no. They came back 3 more times over the next 2 years, each time with a higher number. Each time I told them the same thing. This land isn't for sale. They built their little subdivision anyway, right up against my property line on the eastern edge. Called it something pretentious, one of those names that sounds like it was picked by a marketing committee. The houses went up fast, big McMansions, all the same boring design with maybe 3 different floor plans rotated around to make it look like there was variety. Cookie-cutter luxury homes for people who wanted to feel like they lived in the country without actually living in the country. I didn't pay much attention to it. They stayed on their side of the property line, I stayed on mine. The families that moved in seemed nice enough. A few of them even waved when they drove past on the main road. I figured we'd coexist just fine. Then about 6 months ago, things changed. The subdivision got a new HOA board, and with it came a new president. I didn't know her name yet, but I'd seen her around. She drove this white luxury SUV that looked like it had never seen a dirt road in its life. Always pristine, always shining. The kind of vehicle that screamed that its owner had never done a day of real work. It was early April, prime time for getting the fields ready for planting. I was spreading fertilizer near the eastern edge of my property, the side that borders the subdivision. It's part of my regular routine. The smell isn't pleasant, I'll admit that. Manure-based fertilizer doesn't exactly smell like roses, but it's farm work. It's what you do. Anyone who moves next to a working farm should expect that. I spent a full day working that section, my tractor rumbling along, doing what tractors do. I didn't think anything of it. Just another day of work. 3 days later, I was out fixing a section of fence when I noticed something flapping in the breeze near my front gate. I walked over and found an envelope taped to the gate post. Not just any envelope either. This was fancy paper. Heavy stock with a watermark you could see when you held it up to the light. Very official looking. I opened it up right there, standing in my driveway with mud on my boots and work gloves still on my hands. It was a notice of violation from the HOA. Addressed to me. I read it twice because the first time I thought I must have misunderstood. But no, it was clear as day. The HOA was citing me for unsightly storage of industrial equipment. They meant my tractor. They were also citing me for foul odors that were negatively impacting the quality of life for their residents. They meant my fertilizer. And they were demanding that I immediately remove the tractor from view, preferably by storing it in an enclosed garage, and that I cease all activities that produced offensive smells. Oh, and they were fining me $250. I actually laughed out loud standing there in my driveway. This had to be a mistake. My house sits a quarter-mile back from the main road down a private dirt drive. I'm not even in the same zip code as their subdivision. There's no way anyone thought I was part of their HOA. I took the letter inside, showed it to my wife over dinner. She read it and just shook her head. My wife said this had to be some kind of clerical error and that I should probably just call them and sort it out. I figured she was probably right. I tossed the letter in the recycling bin and went back to work. Figured someone would realize their mistake and that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks went by. I was out working on the tractor one afternoon, changing the oil and doing some routine maintenance. I had the hood up, I was covered in grease up to my elbows, and I was in that zone you get into when you're doing mechanical work, focused, not paying attention to anything else. That's when I heard a car coming up my driveway, not just any car. I could hear it before I saw it. The engine was struggling on the dirt road, tires spinning in the soft mud from the rain we'd had the night before. I straightened up and wiped my hands on a rag just as the white SUV came into view. It pulled up about 20 feet from where I was working and stopped. The driver's side door opened, and out stepped a woman I'd never met but recognized immediately. The HOA president. She picked her way across my driveway like she was walking through a minefield, clearly unhappy about the state of her previously pristine vehicle. Her tires were caked in mud. There were splashes of dirty water up the side panels. She walked right up to me without introducing herself and launched into it. She told me that I had ignored their official notice and that this was unacceptable. She said the HOA took violations very seriously and that my continued defiance was setting a bad example for the community. She demanded that I pay the fine immediately and that I begin construction on a privacy fence at least 8 feet tall to block the view of my equipment from the subdivision. I just stood there, still holding my greasy rag, and let her talk. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I just listened. She went on for a solid 5 minutes, talked about community standards, property values, curb appeal, all the greatest hits of HOA busybodies everywhere. When she finally stopped to take a breath, I spoke for the first time. I told her very calmly that she might want to check her plat maps. She looked at me like I'd just spoken a foreign language. She told me that she didn't need to check anything because the developer had personally assured her that the HOA had visual easement rights over the entire valley and that my property, while technically outside the drawn subdivision, was still subject to their standards because it impacted their residents. I almost laughed again, but managed to keep a straight face. I told her I didn't think that was accurate, but that she was welcome to consult with her HOA attorney if she wanted clarification. That was apparently the wrong thing to say. Her face went red. She pulled herself up to her full height and told me in no uncertain terms that if I didn't comply within the next 7 days, the HOA would be forced to take legal action, including placing a lien on my property to collect the fines. Then she turned on her heel, marched back to her muddy SUV, and drove off. I watched her go, then went back to my tractor, but I wasn't thinking about oil changes anymore. See, here's the thing about farmers. We've got a lot of time on our hands in the off-season. Time to think, time to plan, and time to deal with people who make the mistake of threatening us on our own land. She'd just made a very big mistake. Over the next 2 weeks, things escalated fast. I started getting certified mail, multiple letters, all very official, all very threatening. The HOA was doubling down. They sent me an updated fine schedule showing that my violations were now up to $500 and climbing by $50 per week. They sent me information about their lien process. They even sent me a formal demand letter giving me a final opportunity to comply before they referred the matter to their attorney. I kept every single piece of mail, didn't respond to any of it. Just filed it all away in a folder. Then one morning I got a visit from County Code Enforcement. A guy I actually knew. We'd dealt with each other before on various farm-related permits. He pulled up in his county truck looking apologetic before he even got out. He told me he'd received a formal complaint about my property and that he was required to do a site inspection. He asked if I knew what this was about. I showed him the HOA letters. He read them, then looked at me, then looked back at the letters, then actually started laughing. He told me that I was on agriculturally zoned land, that I had every right to operate farm equipment on my farm, and that the HOA had absolutely no jurisdiction here. He said he'd file his report showing no violations, and that should be the end of it from the county's perspective. We had coffee on my porch and talked about his daughter's college plans for a while, then he left. I thought maybe that would be enough to make the HOA back off. Having an official county report saying there was no violation seemed like pretty clear evidence that they were barking up the wrong tree. But they didn't back off. They doubled down again. 2 days after the code enforcement visit, I was working near the property line. The tractor parked about 15 feet from the edge of my land while I repaired an irrigation line. I heard trucks coming up the main road and looked up to see a tow truck pulling into the subdivision. It slowed down, then actually started to back up toward where my tractor was parked. I jogged over there fast. The tow truck driver was already out and looking at my tractor, clearly sizing up how to hook it. I called out to him and asked what he thought he was doing. He turned around and told me he had authorization from the HOA to remove abandoned equipment from the subdivision property. I told him 3 things very clearly. First, that tractor wasn't abandoned. Second, it wasn't on subdivision property, it was on my private farm. Third, if he hooked that tractor, I'd be calling the sheriff to report him for attempted theft and trespassing. The driver pulled out his phone and made a call. I could hear him talking to someone, presumably whoever had hired him. There was a lot of back and forth. Finally, he hung up, looked at me, and told me he was leaving and that he didn't want any part of whatever dispute this was. He got back in his truck and drove off. I stood there for a minute looking at my tractor, then looking over at the subdivision. I could see the big stone entrance sign from where I was standing. Fancy carved stone with the subdivision name, professionally lit, probably cost a fortune. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't just going to tell these people to go away, I was going to teach them a lesson they wouldn't forget. I called a surveyor that afternoon, not the cheap kind. The professional, licensed, certified kind that you use when you need evidence that will hold up in court. I told him I needed a complete boundary survey of my property with a focus on the eastern edge where I bordered the subdivision. He came out 3 days later with his equipment and his crew. They spent 2 full days doing the survey, taking measurements, setting markers, checking and rechecking everything against the official county records. When he came back with the results, I invited him into my kitchen and he spread out the maps on my table. He showed me the property line, the official legally recorded property line. Then he showed me where certain structures were located in relation to that line. I sat back in my chair and smiled. The subdivision's fancy entrance sign, the one that probably cost 40 grand easy, was built 15 feet inside my property line. Not on the easement, not on the right-of-way, on my private land. And it got better. The community clubhouse, which I'd barely paid attention to when they built it, had a decorative retaining wall along its western side. That wall was also on my property. About 12 feet of it crossed the line. The surveyor asked me if I wanted him to file his report with the county. I told him yes, absolutely, and to send me 3 certified copies. Now I had a choice to make about how to play this. I could have just sent them a cease and desist letter right away, shown them they'd built on my land and demanded they remove it. But where's the fun in that? These people had been threatening me, fining me, trying to tow my tractor. They'd made this personal. So I got creative. I sat down and wrote a very careful, very formal letter to the HOA board. I told them that I'd received their various notices and demands. I said that I was a reasonable person and that I wanted to resolve this matter amicably. I said I would be willing to pay their fines and comply with their demands under one simple condition. All they had to do was provide me with a signed, notarized document from the HOA board proving that they had legal jurisdiction over my property parcel. If they could show me that my land was actually part of their HOA, I'd pay up and build their fence and do whatever else they wanted. I sent it certified mail, return receipt requested. The response came back 10 days later. It was beautiful. Truly beautiful. The HOA president had written a 3-page letter on official HOA stationery signed by herself and 2 other board members and notarized by an actual notary public. In this letter, she admitted that my property parcel was technically outside the drawn boundaries of the subdivision. She acknowledged that according to the county records, I was not a dues-paying member of the HOA. However, she argued that because my land was adjacent to the subdivision and because my activities impacted their residents, the HOA claimed authority based on proximity and the general welfare of their community. She cited some legal-sounding language about nuisance law and community standards. But the key phrase was right there in black and white, notarized and official. My property parcel was technically outside the drawn boundaries of the subdivision. She'd just given me everything I needed. I took that letter along with the surveyor's official report, and I went to see a property attorney in the county seat. Not just any attorney either. I found a guy who specialized in land disputes and property rights. His office was in an old building downtown, and his walls were covered with framed survey maps from cases he'd won. I laid everything out for him. The HOA letters, the threats, the attempted tow, the notarized admission that I wasn't actually in the HOA, and finally the survey showing that they'd built on my land. He read through everything twice, then he leaned back in his chair and grinned. He told me this was one of the most clear-cut property disputes he'd ever seen and that he'd be happy to represent me. He said we had multiple causes of action including harassment, trespass, and conversion of property. But more importantly, we had leverage. He drafted a letter, not a friendly letter, a legal letter that made the previous HOA correspondence look like birthday cards. The letter laid out 3 key points. First, it included the HOA's own written admission that I was not part of their HOA and therefore not subject to their rules, fines, or jurisdiction. This meant all of their previous demands were invalid and all fines were void. Any attempt to place a lien on my property would constitute slander of title and would result in immediate legal action. Second, it included the surveyor's official report showing that the HOA had constructed improvements on my private property without permission, easement, or right-of-way. This was trespass and the improvements needed to be removed. Third, and this was my attorney's favorite part, it gave them two options. They could remove the entrance sign and retaining wall at their own expense within 30 days, or they could enter into a lease agreement with me for use of my land at a rate of $5,000 per month, retroactive to the date of construction. My attorney sent the letter via certified mail to every member of the HOA board, to the HOA's property management company, and to the subdivision's developer. He made sure everyone involved knew exactly what was happening. Then we waited. It took less than a week for the phone calls to start. Not to me directly, but to my attorney. The HOA's lawyer called, the property management company called, individual board members called. Everyone suddenly wanted to talk, wanted to negotiate, wanted to find a reasonable solution. My attorney told them all the same thing. The letter was clear. 30 days to remove the structures or start paying rent. There was no third option. I heard through a friend who lived in the subdivision that they held an emergency board meeting. Actually, they held 3 emergency board meetings in 2 weeks. The HOA president tried to defend her actions, tried to argue that she'd been protecting property values, tried to claim she'd been following the developer's guidance. None of it mattered. The other board members had figured out that her crusade against my tractor was about to cost the HOA tens of thousands of dollars. That $40,000 entrance sign? It would cost nearly that much to have it carefully dismantled, moved 15 feet, and reinstalled. The retaining wall would have to be completely torn down and rebuilt. Or they could pay me $5,000 a month forever. Either way, the HOA was looking at a massive unplanned expense because their president had decided to pick a fight with a farmer who wasn't even in their HOA. 3 weeks into the 30-day deadline, I got a call from my attorney. He told me the HOA had capitulated. They were going to remove the structures. They'd hired a contractor and filed the necessary permits with the county. They'd also voted in a special session to remove their president from the board. She was out, done, finished. The work started about a week later. I watched from my porch as contractors showed up with equipment. They started with the retaining wall, which was the easier of the 2 projects. It took them 3 days to tear it down and another 4 to rebuild it in the correct location, entirely on HOA property. The entrance sign was more complicated. That thing was a massive carved stone monument set in a concrete foundation. They had to bring in a small crane to lift it. The whole process took almost 2 weeks. They had to excavate the old foundation, pour a new one in the correct spot, move the sign, reinstall it, redo all the electrical for the lighting, and then landscape around it. I sat on my porch most days watching the work, drinking iced tea, and enjoying the show. My wife asked me one evening if I felt bad about the cost to the HOA. I thought about it for a minute, then told her no. They'd tried to bully me off my own land. They'd threatened liens, sent code enforcement after me, tried to tow my tractor. All because their president didn't like looking at farm equipment from her suburban palace. This wasn't about me being petty, this was about them learning a very expensive lesson about property rights and about what happens when you threaten people who haven't done anything wrong. The former HOA president moved away about 2 months after everything was settled. I heard she couldn't handle the embarrassment. Every time she drove past that entrance sign in its new location, she was reminded of how badly she'd messed up. Eventually, she put her house on the market and left. I can't say I was sorry to see her go. Life went back to normal after that. I still farm my 45 acres. I still drive my slightly rusty, perfectly functional John Deere tractor. I still spread fertilizer in the spring when I need to. And nobody from the subdivision has ever complained again. Actually, that's not quite true. A few months after everything was settled, I had a new neighbor from the subdivision stop by. He was a younger guy, maybe 30, and he'd apparently heard the whole story from the other residents. He came up my driveway in his sensible sedan and knocked on my door. When I answered, he apologized on behalf of the subdivision for what had happened. He told me he'd always loved seeing my farm and that his kids thought my tractor was the coolest thing they'd ever seen. He asked if it would be okay if his family came by sometime during harvest season to watch the equipment working. I told him that would be fine and that he was welcome any time. That's the thing these HOA types never understand. Most people are reasonable. Most people don't care if their neighbor has a working tractor on a working farm. Most people understand that when you choose to live next to agricultural land, you're going to see and smell agricultural activities. It's the small percentage of busybodies, the ones who think they can control everything around them, who cause all the problems. The ones who think their aesthetic preferences trump someone else's property rights. The ones who mistake their HOA presidency for actual authority over people who never agreed to their rules. My tractor sits right now parked near the property line on the eastern edge of my farm. Same spot it's always been parked. I can see it from my porch, and I'm sure people in the subdivision can see it from their houses too. It's a good tractor. It does honest work, and it's on my land where it belongs. Nobody's going to tell me different. Looking back, the whole situation taught me something important. It's easy to feel powerless when someone with official-sounding authority starts making demands. When you get those fancy letters with legal language and threats of fines or liens, it can be intimidating. A lot of people would have just paid the fine to make it go away, even though they didn't do anything wrong. But sometimes you have to stand your ground. You have to know your rights and be willing to defend them. And most importantly, you have to understand that bullies, whether they're wearing HOA badges or anything else, usually back down the moment someone stands up to them with facts and law on their side. The surveyor's bill wasn't cheap. The attorney's fees weren't cheap either. All told, I spent about $4,000 defending my property rights, but it was worth every penny. Not just because I won, but because it sent a clear message that I'm not someone who can be pushed around on my own land. The HOA, meanwhile, spent somewhere north of $60,000 when all was said and done. The demolition and reconstruction costs, their own attorney fees, the special assessments they had to levy on all the homeowners to cover the unexpected expense. All because one person decided that looking at a tractor was unacceptable and that she had the authority to do something about it. I hope the other residents learned something from that too. When you elect people to your HOA board, you're giving them real power to make decisions that can cost you real money. Maybe next time they'll think twice about electing someone who seems more interested in wielding power than in actually serving the community. As for me, I'm back to farming. Planting season went great this year. Harvest is coming up soon. The tractor is running smooth. The fields are healthy and life is good. And every time I drive past that relocated entrance sign on my way to town, I smile. It's a 15-foot reminder, carved in expensive stone, that property rights matter and that trying to bully a farmer on his own land is a losing proposition. My wife told me last week that I should let it go, that the whole thing is over and done with. She's probably right, but I can't help it. Every time I see that sign in its new location, I feel a sense of satisfaction. They tried to make me hide my tractor, they tried to fine me, they tried to change how I operated my own farm on my own land. And in the end, the only thing that changed was their entrance sign moving 15 feet and their bank account getting a whole lot lighter. There's a part of me that wishes it hadn't escalated the way it did. If the HOA president had just checked her facts, if she'd looked at a property map before sending that first letter, none of this would have happened. We could have been neighbors without incident. I never wanted conflict. But she didn't check. She assumed. She let her desire for control override common sense and basic due diligence. And that assumption cost her HOA a fortune and cost her personally any credibility she had in the community. The truth is, I'm not the vindictive type. I don't go looking for fights, I just want to work my land, grow my crops, and live my life. But when someone comes onto my property and tells me I can't park my own tractor on my own farm, when they threaten me with fines and liens for the crime of farming, well, that's when I dig in. This land has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather broke his back clearing some of these fields. My father spent 50 years working this soil. I've put 12 years of my own sweat into it. No HOA president with delusions of authority was going to take that away from me or tell me how to use it. And the funny thing is, after all of this, I think some of the subdivision residents actually respect the farm more now. I've had a few people stop and chat when they're out walking near the property line. They ask questions about what I'm growing, how the tractor works, what it's like to farm. Some of them seem genuinely interested. There's a couple with kids who walk past sometimes. The kids always wave at me when I'm out working. Last week, I gave them a jar of honey from my bees. Their mom thanked me and said they'd been learning about where food comes from in school. That's what neighbors should be like. Friendly, respectful, understanding that different people live different lives and that's okay. I think about what might have happened if I'd just paid that first fine. If I'd said, okay, I'll hide my tractor, I'll stop working near the property line, I'll do whatever you want. Where would it have ended? Would they have kept pushing? Would they have found other things to complain about? Would I have spent years being harassed by an HOA I wasn't even part of? Standing up to them wasn't just about that one fight. It was about drawing a line and making it clear that the line existed. This is my property. These are my rights. You don't get to cross that line just because you don't like what you see. The legal system worked the way it was supposed to. I had documentation, I had a professional survey, I had their own written admission that I wasn't in their HOA. When I presented all of that to an attorney and then to them, there was no argument they could make. The law was clear. That's another lesson in all of this. Document everything. Keep every letter, every email, every piece of correspondence. When someone is harassing you or making unreasonable demands, you need that paper trail. My attorney said that case file was one of the most organized he'd ever seen from a client. That made his job easier and made my case stronger. And the certified mail was crucial. Every communication I sent them, I sent certified with return receipt. That meant I had proof they received it and when they received it. When they claimed they never got something or they didn't understand the timeline, I had receipts showing exactly when the documents were delivered. It's boring work keeping track of all that, filing away papers, making copies, tracking dates. But it's necessary if you want to protect yourself. I've had a few people ask me if I was worried during the whole process, if I thought maybe the HOA would find some way to win, or if I was afraid of the legal costs spinning out of control. Honestly, no. Once I had that survey in hand showing they'd built on my property, I knew I had them. There's no legal argument that makes it okay to build on someone else's land without permission. And once I had their notarized letter saying I wasn't in the HOA, their whole case against me collapsed. The only risk was that they'd drag it out, make me spend more on attorney fees, try to bleed me dry financially. But my attorney was confident that wouldn't happen. He said once they understood the legal reality, they'd fold. And he was right, the whole thing took about 4 months from start to finish. 4 months from that first ridiculous violation notice to watching them move their entrance sign. In the grand scheme of things, not that long, but it felt longer while it was happening. Now it's been almost a year since everything wrapped up. The subdivision has a new HOA board. I've heard they're much more reasonable. They actually checked their property boundaries and made sure there were no other encroachment issues anywhere. Apparently, they found a couple of residents who had built fences slightly over the line and had to move them, but nothing as dramatic as the entrance sign situation. Life goes on. Farming doesn't stop for legal disputes. I had crops to plant, fields to maintain, equipment to repair. The HOA mess was just an annoying distraction from the real work. But I'll admit, there's a part of me that's glad it happened. Not because I enjoyed the conflict, but because it proves something I've always believed. You don't need to be rich or powerful to defend your rights. You just need to know what your rights are, document everything, and be willing to stand your ground. The HOA had official stationery. They had lawyers on retainer. They had a budget and a board and authority over hundreds of homes. And none of that mattered when they tried to exert authority they didn't have over property they didn't control. I'm just a farmer with a tractor and some land that's been in my family for decades, but I had the law on my side and that was enough. My tractor is still parked in the same spot, still slightly rusty, still perfectly functional, still visible from the subdivision, and nobody says a word about it anymore. That's exactly how it should be. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I work in restoration for a nationwide insurance builder. I've been at the company for 5 years, which due to high turnover rate is the longest of anyone in my division. My boss's son, who I trained and still asks for my advice, got promoted to supervisor. I didn't care much because I like him, and the boss has always said I'm the best restoration technician at the company and big things would happen for me. In my 5 years at the company, I have handled multi-million-dollar jobs, spent almost a year working interstate on major disasters, floods, cyclones, etc., and am seen by the other site-based employees as a leader and the most knowledgeable in regards to our industry. I even have near-perfect scores on my qualification exams. I have received awards through the company acknowledging my efforts and commitment. I know I sound like a wanker here, but I am the best the company has to offer, and the division has tripled in size since I've been here. I also do the vast majority of overtime and on-call emergency works. Every year, in my annual review, I have suggested we implement some new roles as all site staff, with the exception of my boss's son, have the job title of technician, no hierarchy whatsoever. So I suggested we needed a team leader or senior technician or supervisor who can be across all projects to prevent mistakes and have consistency in how we handle everything. I also suggested we have an estimator to provide the quotes on each job, as there's too much variation in all techs doing their own quotes. Every year when I've brought this up, I've been told that is the plan as the business grows, and I'm at the top of the list for promotion. Cut to mid-2025, 2 new management positions are created in the office, and 2 of our office staff are promoted. Then, without any kind of announcement or application process, the next most experienced technician is promoted above me to the newly created supervisor/estimator role. This guy is an absolute fuckwit, who constantly gets away with work that doesn't comply with industry standards and instructs newer staff to forget the standards and do what he says. Then, when it inevitably fucks up and we get complaints from insurance companies or clients, blames the newer technicians and says he never told them to do it that way. This guy is wetting framework with chemicals before moisture checks so he can install drying equipment and bill for it. Or he'll order us to install industrial fans in mold-affected areas, which will just blow spores around and contaminate the entire building. Additionally, our division absorbed the other restoration division within the company, so we have 3 new technicians that get to be senior or leading technicians, and get paid $10,000 more than I do. I am pissed. The company then holds applications publicly for a restoration supervisor who will balance out the estimator because they know he's a shifty Siat. I applied, was told that the position was not going ahead, then they immediately hire someone. I complained to HR about this and they set up a meeting with the boss who basically told me to get a haircut, and I looked too young and immature to have a higher position, I'm 32, and that I'm too valuable in my current role. So with all that context, sorry I know it's a lot, let's get into the malicious compliance. Now being forced to take orders from a guy who ignores the industry standards, I've been asking for his instructions in writing on every job because I'm just a technician, I don't know better, and then including those instructions in my reports. I have created a paper trail of this guy ignoring standards and defrauding the insurance companies. Next, our company has a zero contact with asbestos policy. If any material that can potentially contain asbestos is found within the work area, we must immediately stop work, shut the site down, install signage, and request testing and removal. Yes, technically in Australia you can remove up to 3 square meters without a ticket, but company policy is company policy. Asbestos in Australia is handled very similarly to mold, so I already have the required PPE and asbestos grade bags to deal with it and used to just sort it out myself if it was a tiny piece of cement sheeting in a floor or wall cavity. But for almost the past year, anytime I have uncovered even the tiniest piece of cement sheeting or old glue, I have shut down the site, delayed jobs for weeks at a time, and cost the company thousands. I even do it for old shiny paint because it could contain lead, right? If I'm removing a floor, I'll send a message to the supervisor estimator asking if I must rake all soil under the flooring and really just go digging for anything I can take a photo of and justify shutting the site down. Then put it back on him like you said I had to, when I know if it weren't in writing he would just hide it. You would be amazed at how often I can do this. I could throw a dart at a map and the house I hit would have some suspicious material somewhere on the property. Yeah, so I've been doing this for a while. I also stopped doing overtime unless I actually need the money. At this point, I'm just going through the motions for the next 2 years until I can get my long service leave, then I'm just going to look for another job. Nothing has really come of my malicious compliance yet, I'll update if it does, but for now I'm playing the slow game. If one of these guys above me quits or gets fired, maybe they'll offer the job to me, but at this point they can get ducked. If I get fired, so be it. Update. The fallout has started. After 6 months, they've finally noticed that the quality of my work has dropped. My boss is freaking out over a job I did poorly. The insurance company is pissed because it's not up to the expected standard, and my boss reckons I just cost him $50,000. No floor protection. The containments are falling down, and there's holes where you've removed the floor. This isn't like you. Is everything okay with you? You're one of my best guys. This is the sort of thing I'd expect from a junior. I wanted to rant about how I'm the same rank as a junior and wasn't worth promoting when I was the best tech here. I wanted to tell him, you said I wasn't mature enough and need to act my age. I heard act your wage. But I didn't do that. I'm saving that for my annual review next month. Instead, all I said was, yeah, I know I can do better because I can. I just don't want to work that hard if it doesn't get me anywhere. Now we've got half our staff heading back out there to clean it all up. Anyway, thank you for watching.